The crack of a gunshot echoed through St. Joe, Missouri, as Sophia Kincaid ducked behind an overturned wagon, her heart pounding against her ribs like a wild Mustang. The year was 1875, and the frontier town had descended into chaos as the notorious Reeves gang tore through the main street, bullets flying and innocent bystanders scrambling for cover. "Get down, lady. You trying to get yourself killed." A gruff voice barked as strong hands yanked her deeper into the shadows. Sophia found herself staring into the coldest blue eyes she'd ever seen, set in a face weathered by sun and hardship. Xavier Kane, the most feared gunslinger in 3 counties, had just saved her life. Sophia clutched her leather-bound journal to her chest, the pages inside containing her life's work. Stories of the West, written not as dime novel fantasies, but as the complex, brutal, beautiful reality she'd witnessed since arriving from Boston 6 months ago. "I need to see this," she stammered. "For my writing." Xavier's face hardened. "Your written ain't worth your life, woman. Stay put or I'll tie you to that hitching post myself." He moved with lethal precision, his revolver an extension of his arm as he fired 2 shots, dropping a pair of Reeves' men without seeming to aim. Sophia watched, terrified yet transfixed, as this dangerous man single-handedly drove the remaining gang members out of town. Later that evening, as the town struggled to recover from the attack, Sophia sat in the corner of the Frontier Saloon, frantically documenting the day's events by lamplight. Her fingers were stained with ink, her auburn hair falling loose from its pins after the day's excitement. "You got a death wish, Miss Kincaid." The familiar gruff voice made her jump. Xavier Kane loomed over her table, his tall frame casting a shadow across her writing. "Mr. Kane, I was just being a fool," he finished for her, pulling out a chair without asking permission. He slid into it with the easy grace of a predator, then leaned forward, those ice-blue eyes boring into hers. St. Joe's no place for a woman alone, especially one who runs toward gunfire instead of away from it. Sophia straightened her spine. "I'm a journalist, sir. I came west to document the frontier's final days for the Atlantic Monthly. I cannot document what I do not witness." Xavier's calloused hand closed around her wrist, not painfully but with unmistakable strength. "And they'll be documenting your funeral if you keep this up. The Reeves gang doesn't take kindly to witnesses." A chill ran through Sophia, but she refused to show fear. "I appreciate your concern, Mr. Kane, but my work is important." "More important than your life?" he asked, releasing her wrist and signaling to the barkeep for whiskey. Sophia studied him in the dim light. His face was all hard angles, with a strong jaw darkened by stubble. A scar ran along his left temple, disappearing into his dark hair. His hands were rough and scarred working hands, fighting hands, the hands of a man who had survived in a land that killed most. "Why did you help me today?" she asked suddenly. Xavier's expression didn't change as he downed his whiskey. "Helpin' you was an accident, just happened to be in the way of my bullet and those Reeves boys." "I don't believe you." His eyes narrowed. "Believe what you want, Miss Kincaid, just stay out of my way and out of trouble." With that, he stood and walked away, leaving Sophia staring after him, her pulse racing. She realized she had just found something far more interesting to write about than a simple gang shootout. The mysterious Xavier Kane, a man whose reputation painted him as a killer but whose actions today suggested something more complex. What Sophia couldn't have known was that her presence in St. Joe had already set in motion events that would change both their lives forever. The Reeves gang would be back, and when they returned, neither her words nor Xavier's gun would be enough to save them. The next morning, Sophia woke to pounding on her door at the modest boarding house where she'd taken a room. Mrs. Fletcher, the owner, stood wringing her hands, her face ashen. "Miss Kincaid, there's a gentleman here to see you. He's rather insistent." Sophia quickly dressed, her mind racing. When she entered the small parlor, Xavier Kane stood by the window, his tall frame tense as a drawn bowstring. "Pack your things," he ordered without preamble. "You're leaving St. Joe." Sophia blinked. I beg your pardon, the Reeves gang. They know who you are now. Got word from the telegraph operator that they're putting together a bigger crew coming back to settle scores. His jaw tightened. Your name was specifically mentioned. But my assignment will be mighty hard to complete if you're dead, Xavier cut her off. I've got a wagon outside. We leave in 30 minutes. Sophia felt a flash of anger. Mr. Kane, while I appreciate the warning, you have no authority over me or my movements. I came west precisely to document this kind of "listen, woman," Xavier growled, closing the distance between them in 2 long strides. This ain't Boston. Out here, you don't get second chances. The Reeves boys don't care that you're educated or that you write for fancy Eastern papers. To them, you're just another witness who needs silencing. Something in his eyes, a flicker of genuine concern beneath the anger, made Sophia pause. Why do you care what happens to me? For a moment, Xavier seemed taken aback by the direct question. Then his expression hardened again. I don't. But I've got business up north, and I don't need the distraction of knowing I left some foolhardy woman to die when I could have done something about it. Sophia considered her options. She had come west for authentic stories, not to die before writing them. Perhaps this journey with the enigmatic gunslinger would provide material far more valuable than remaining in St. Joe. Very well, Mr. Kane. 30 minutes. True to her word, Sophia was ready in 25, her essential belongings packed into one trunk and a carpet bag. She wore her most practical traveling dress and sturdy boots, her hair pinned securely beneath a modest hat. As Xavier loaded her trunk onto the wagon, Sophia discreetly tucked her small Derringer pistol into her pocket, a precaution her father had insisted upon when she announced her western journey. They left St. Joe as the sun climbed higher in the sky, heading northwest along the Missouri River. Xavier drove the team with expert hands, his eyes constantly scanning the horizon, the road ahead, the woods beside them. They traveled in silence for miles, the only sounds the creak of wagon wheels and the steady rhythm of hoofbeats. Where exactly are we going, Mr. Kane? Sophia finally asked, adjusting her hat against the midday sun. My ranch. 3 days' journey from here, just south of Nebraska territory. You'll be safe there until this blows over. You have a ranch? Sophia couldn't keep the surprise from her voice. Xavier shot her a sideways glance. What did you think I did? Just wander around shooting people? Sophia felt heat rise to her cheeks. Your reputation in town doesn't suggest ranching as your primary occupation. A muscle tightened in his jaw. Reputations rarely tell the whole story, Miss Kincaid. Something a writer ought to know. The rebuke stung, but Sophia recognized its truth. Is that why you helped me? Because there's more to your story than people know. For a long moment, Xavier didn't answer, his focus on a distant ridge where a plume of dust suggested riders. Finally satisfied they weren't being followed, he spoke. 8 years ago, I had a wife. Her name was Alina. His voice was so low Sophia had to lean closer to hear. She was a lot like you, stubborn, educated, thought she understood the West from books she'd read. Came out here with her head full of romantic notions. Sophia remained silent, sensing the importance of whatever he was about to share. The Reeves gang was just starting then. They came to our homestead while I was in town getting supplies. His knuckles whitened on the reins. By the time I got back, Alina was dead. They'd taken everything of value, burned what they couldn't carry. I'm sorry, Sophia whispered, the words inadequate against such a loss. I spent 2 years hunting them down, got most of them. Preston Reeves and his brother escaped, built a new gang. Xavier's eyes were distant, focused on memories Sophia couldn't see. So no, Miss Kincaid, I don't particularly care about you, but I've seen what happens when educated Eastern women underestimate the dangers out here. Once was enough. The confession hung between them as the wagon rolled on, putting mile after mile between them and St. Joe. Sophia watched Xavier's profile against the vast sky, seeing him now not just as the dangerous gunman who'd saved her, but as a man carrying a burden of loss and vengeance that had shaped him into something hard and sharp-edged. That night, they made camp by a small creek. Xavier efficiently set about building a fire and preparing a simple meal, his movements economical and practiced. Sophia watched him, making mental notes for her writing, observing how different he seemed away from town, more at ease, though no less vigilant. "You keep staring at me like I'm some rare specimen," Xavier said without looking up from the coffee he was brewing. "I'm a writer." "Observation is my trade," Sophia replied, pulling her shawl tighter against the evening chill. Xavier handed her a tin cup of coffee, their fingers brushing briefly. "And what have you observed about me so far, Miss Kincaid?" Sophia took a sip, gathering her thoughts. "That you're a man of contradictions. You claim not to care, yet your actions suggest otherwise. You're feared in town, yet you maintain a ranch and apparently value home and stability. You speak roughly, but there's education in your vocabulary when you forget to hide it." Xavier's eyes narrowed slightly. "You think you've got me all figured out after one day?" "No," Sophia said honestly. "I think you're far more complex than the stories told about you, and I find that intriguing." Something flashed in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or wariness. He looked away, focusing on the darkening horizon. "You should get some rest. I'll take first watch." Sophia settled into her bedroll, the hard ground a far cry from her boarding house bed, but she was too mentally stimulated to mind. As she drifted towards sleep, watching Xavier's silhouette against the stars, she realized she had found a story worth telling if she could just uncover the man beneath the legend. Their second day of travel brought new challenges. A spring storm rolled in from the west, bringing driving rain that turned the trail to mud. Xavier pushed on, his face grim beneath his rain-slicked hat, until the wagon wheels began to sink dangerously deep into the softened earth. "We'll stop at the next ridge," he shouted over the downpour. "There's an old line shack where we can wait out the worst of it." Sophia nodded, too cold and wet to argue. Her fingers were numb where she gripped the wagon seat, her dress soaked through despite the oilskin coat Xavier had tersely handed her earlier. The line shack proved to be little more than a one-room cabin with a leaking roof, but it offered walls and a fireplace, which was more than they'd have had on the open trail. Xavier unloaded only what they needed, then saw to the horses, securing them beneath a lean-to attached to the cabin's side. Inside, Sophia struggled to light a fire with trembling hands. Xavier returned, water streaming from his hat and coat, and gently moved her aside. "You're making a mess of it," he said, but the usual harshness was absent from his voice. With practiced movements, he arranged kindling and struck a match, coaxing a small flame to life. "Thank you," Sophia said through chattering teeth. She stood as close to the growing fire as she dared, acutely aware of her sodden clothing clinging to her body. Xavier kept his back to her as he rummaged through his pack, eventually producing a flask and 2 tin cups. "Whiskey," he said, pouring a measure into each cup. "Medicinal." Sophia accepted the cup gratefully. The liquor burned down her throat, spreading warmth through her chest. "Do you often travel in such conditions, Mr. Kane?" "When necessary." Xavier removed his wet coat and hung it near the fire. His shirt beneath was relatively dry, clinging to the muscular contours of his shoulders and chest. Sophia quickly averted her gaze, blaming the heat in her cheeks on the whiskey. "Your clothes need drying," Xavier stated matter-of-factly. "I'll step outside while you change into something dry." Before Sophia could respond, he'd grabbed his rifle and slipped back into the storm, pulling the door firmly shut behind him. She stared at the closed door for a moment, then hurried to change into her only spare dress, hanging her wet garments near the fire to dry. When Xavier returned 10 minutes later, he was carrying a rabbit. "Found dinner," he said simply, setting about cleaning and preparing the animal with practiced efficiency. As the rabbit roasted over the fire, Sophia pulled out her journal and began to write, capturing the day's events while they were still fresh. Xavier watched her from across the small space, his expression unreadable in the flickering firelight. "What exactly do you write about?" he finally asked. Sophia looked up, surprised by his interest. Life on the frontier. The people, the challenges, the beauty, the harshness. I try to capture the truth of it, not the romanticized version popular in dime novels, nor the entirely bleak picture some Eastern papers paint. And people read this. Some do. I believe there's value in documenting this time in our nation's history as the Wild West begins to fade into something more domesticated. She hesitated, then added, "I'd like to write about you someday." Xavier's expression darkened. "Not interested in being one of your stories, Miss Kincaid. Everyone has a story worth telling, Mr. Kane." "Some stories are better left buried," he replied, turning the rabbit on its spit. The storm raged through the night, forcing them to share the small cabin longer than planned. Sophia took the rickety cot in the corner while Xavier sat by the fire, dozing upright with his rifle across his lap. Despite the cramped conditions and the howling wind outside, Sophia felt strangely safe in his presence. By morning, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, but the trails would remain muddy and treacherous. Xavier studied the sky with a practiced eye. "We'll wait another few hours," he decided. "Let the ground dry some before we risk the wagon." They used the time to replenish their supplies, Xavier hunting while Sophia gathered edible plants she recognized from her guidebooks. By midday, they were back on the trail, moving slower than before but making steady progress northward. As they crested a hill late that afternoon, Xavier suddenly pulled the wagon to a halt, his body tensing. Sophia followed his gaze and saw 3 riders approaching from the east, moving at a controlled canter. "Get down," Xavier ordered, reaching for his rifle, "and stay hidden." "Are they Reeves' men?" Sophia whispered, sliding to the wagon floor. "Can't tell yet. Either way, 3 riders approaching a lone wagon never means anything good." He positioned himself so the wagon provided some cover, his rifle ready. The riders slowed as they neared, and Xavier's posture shifted subtly. "Marshal Thompson," he called out in greeting, though his rifle remained steady, "long way from Clearwater." The lead rider, a weathered man with a silver badge on his chest, tipped his hat. "Kane." "Heard you were in these parts." His eyes drifted to the wagon, where Sophia remained partially hidden. "Traveling with company, I see. Miss Kincaid is a journalist from back east. I'm escorting her to safer territory after some trouble in St. Joe." Marshal Thompson's eyebrows rose. "Journalist, huh? And what kind of trouble might that be?" Xavier's jaw tightened. "Reeves' gang kind of trouble," the marshal's expression sobered. "They're moving north then. Got word they hit a settlement near the border last week." He studied Xavier for a long moment. "Strange to see you playing protector, Kane. Thought your vendetta against the Reeves boys was personal." "It is," Xavier replied coldly. An uncomfortable silence fell before the marshal nodded once. "Well, we're heading to St. Joe to meet with the local law. Any information you have about the gang's movements would be appreciated." Xavier provided a brief, precise account of the gang's attack on St. Joe and what he'd learned about their plans. As he spoke, Sophia noted how the other 2 riders' deputies she assumed kept their hands close to their sidearms, watching Xavier with wary respect. "Miss Kincaid," the marshal addressed her directly, "you're safer with Kane than most, despite his reputation. But if you'd prefer to ride with us to the next town—" "No thank you, Marshal," Sophia interrupted, surprising herself with her certainty. "I believe Mr. Kane will see me safely to our destination." The marshal's weathered face creased with what might have been amusement. "As you wish, madam." To Xavier, he added, "Watch your back, Kane. Word is Preston Reeves has put a price on your head." "Wouldn't be the first time," Xavier replied grimly. As the lawman rode away, Sophia noticed Xavier watching them with narrow eyes until they disappeared over the horizon. "You don't trust them," she observed. "I don't trust anyone wearing a badge," he said flatly, stowing his rifle and taking up the reins again. "Too easy to buy loyalty in these parts. But surely the law out here is whatever the man with the most money or the fastest gun says it is." Xavier flicked the reins, setting the horses in motion again. That's another truth your Eastern readers might find hard to swallow. As evening approached, the landscape changed, the rolling plains giving way to more varied terrain with scattered stands of trees and rocky outcroppings. Xavier guided the wagon with increasing vigilance, often stopping to check their back trail. "We're being followed," he finally admitted when Sophia questioned his behavior. "Have been since we met the marshal." Fear clutched at Sophia's heart. Reeves' men, maybe, or bounty hunters. Xavier's face was grim in the fading light. "We'll push on after dark, try to lose them in that stretch of woods ahead." Night travel was perilous, but Xavier navigated with uncanny skill, following paths only he seemed able to see in the moonlight. Sophia fought exhaustion, forcing herself to stay alert, her hand occasionally touching the derringer in her pocket for reassurance. Near midnight, Xavier finally turned the wagon onto a barely visible track that led deep into a dense grove of cottonwoods. The trees closed around them like a protective canopy, branches occasionally scraping against the wagon sides. "There's a hidden clearing ahead," Xavier explained quietly. "Used it before when I needed to disappear for a while." The clearing was small but perfect for their needs, surrounded by trees and brush, with a small spring bubbling up from among moss-covered rocks. Xavier unhitched the horses with swift efficiency, speaking to them in low, soothing tones as he led them to water. "No fire tonight," he told Sophia. "Too risky?" They ate a cold supper of jerky and hardtack, sitting close together in the wagon bed for warmth as the spring night grew chilly. Sophia wrapped her shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying not to shiver. Without a word, Xavier removed his coat and draped it over her. The heavy fabric carried his scent leather, tobacco, and something uniquely him that Sophia couldn't name. "You'll be cold," she protested weakly. "I'm used to it," he replied, his voice a low rumble in the darkness. Sophia studied his profile in the moonlight filtering through the trees. "Why are you really helping me, Mr. Kane? And don't say it's because I remind you of your wife. I think there's more to it than that." Xavier was silent for so long Sophia thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice held none of its usual harshness. "Maybe I'm tired of just surviving. Maybe I'm looking for something worth living for instead of just things worth dying for." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes silvered by moonlight. "Or maybe I'm just a fool who can't stand to see another innocent person hurt by the Reeves gang when I could prevent it." The honesty in his words stirred something in Sophia: admiration, understanding, and something deeper she wasn't ready to name. "I don't think that makes you a fool, Mr. Kane. I think it makes you a better man than you believe yourself to be." Xavier's gaze held hers for a long moment before he looked away. "Get some rest, Miss Kincaid. I'll keep watch." Sophia settled down, using her carpetbag as a pillow, Xavier's coat a warm weight over her. Despite the danger lurking in the darkness beyond their hidden clearing, she felt strangely at peace. Just before sleep claimed her, she murmured, "Thank you, Xavier." It was the first time she had used his given name, and though he made no reply, she felt the subtle shift between them, a small but significant step from strangers toward something more complex. Dawn brought with it a heavy mist that clung to the trees, enveloping their clearing in a ghostly shroud. Sophia woke to find Xavier alert and watchful, his rifle across his knees, looking as though he hadn't slept at all. When he saw she was awake, he put a finger to his lips, then gestured for her to listen. In the distance, barely audible through the mist, came the sound of men's voices and horses moving through the underbrush. Reeves' men. Sophia mouthed silently. Xavier nodded once, his expression grim. He moved with silent grace, helping Sophia down from the wagon and leading her deeper into the trees, away from the approaching voices. They left the wagon and most of their supplies behind, taking only what Xavier could carry in a small pack, along with his weapons and Sophia's journal. For nearly an hour, they picked their way through the woods, moving parallel to a stream that would hide their tracks. Xavier kept Sophia close, occasionally steadying her with a hand at her elbow when the terrain grew difficult. Despite the danger, Sophia found herself cataloging details for later: the play of early light through the mist-shrouded trees, the quiet competence in Xavier's movements, the startling gentleness of his calloused hands when he helped her over fallen logs. Eventually, they reached the edge of the woods. Xavier crouched behind a large boulder, pulling Sophia down beside him. Beyond the tree line stretched open prairie, with a distant ribbon of road visible through the lifting mist. "They'll have men watching the road," Xavier said softly. "We need another way." Sophia pushed a strand of hair from her face, her mind racing. "What about the stream? Could we follow it?" Xavier's eyes widened slightly, a flicker of approval crossing his features. "It connects to the Missouri about 5 miles east. Good thinking." They backtracked to the stream, following its winding course through the woods. The going was slower here, the banks sometimes steep and slippery, but the water would hide their trail completely. By midday, the stream had widened considerably, its current stronger as it neared its confluence with the Missouri. Xavier halted at a bend where several fallen trees created a natural shelter. "We'll rest here," he decided, unshoulder his pack. "Then follow the river north after dark." "My ranch is still a good 30 miles away." 30 miles? Sophia sank down onto a relatively dry log, fatigue evident in her posture. "Without the wagon, that's at least 2 days' walk." "1 day if we push hard," Xavier corrected, offering her his canteen. "But we might not have to walk all of it. There's a trading post about 10 miles upriver. If we're lucky, I can get us horses." Sophia drank deeply, then handed back the canteen. "And if we're not lucky," Xavier's expression was unreadable, "then we keep walking." As they shared a meager meal of jerky and the last of their hardtack, Sophia found herself studying Xavier with new eyes. Away from town, on the move and fighting for survival, he seemed to shed layers of the hardened gunslinger persona. She caught glimpses of another man beneath, intelligent, resourceful, even considerate in his own gruff way. "Tell me about your ranch," she said as they rested in the dappled shade. "Is it very large?" Xavier seemed surprised by the question. "Modest compared to some." 800 acres, mostly grazing land, good water, solid house. A flicker of something like pride crossed his face. "Built it myself after a leaner, needed something to do with my hands besides killing." "Do you run cattle?" "Some, mostly horses. I have a way with them." For the first time since she'd met him, Xavier's expression softened. "Horses don't care about your past or your reputation, they just know if you treat them right." Sophia nodded, sensing the truth in his words. "And do you manage the ranch alone?" "Have a foreman, old Hank Wheeler. Fought with him in the war, and a couple of hands who don't ask too many questions." Xavier's gaze turned distant. "I'm not there as much as I should be, always seem to find trouble that takes me away." "Or trouble finds you," Sophia suggested gently. Xavier's blue eyes fixed on hers, something unexpected flickering in their depths. "Seems that way lately." The moment stretched between them, charged with unspoken possibilities, until a distant crack of gunfire shattered the silence. Xavier was on his feet instantly, rifle in hand. "They're closer than I thought," he muttered, scanning the woods behind them. "We need to move. Now." They abandoned their resting place, moving downstream with increased urgency. The sound of pursuit grew more distinct, men's voices calling to each other, branches breaking, horses neighing. "They're driving us toward the river," Xavier said grimly, "trying to cut off our escape routes." As they rounded a bend in the stream, the trees suddenly gave way to an open area where the water emptied into the much larger Missouri River. Exposed and vulnerable, they froze at the tree line. "There's no cover," Sophia whispered, eyes wide as she surveyed the open ground between them and the river's edge. Xavier's face hardened with decision. "There's no choice, we have to cross." "Cross? The Missouri?" Sophia stared at the wide, turbulent river with undisguised alarm. I can't swim well." "You won't have to." Xavier was already scanning the riverbank, his eyes falling on a half-submerged log caught among some rocks. "We'll use that to help us stay afloat. The current will carry us downstream, away from them." The sounds of pursuit grew louder. They had minutes, perhaps less. Xavier gripped Sophia's shoulders, forcing her to look at him. "Trust me," he said, the words both command and plea. Something in his intense gaze, determination, protection, a promise steadied her. Sophia nodded once. "I trust you." They moved quickly to the water's edge. Xavier had Sophia secure her journal inside his oilskin packet, then tied it to her waist. He checked his pistol, ensuring it was wrapped securely in his bandana to keep it dry, then tucked it into his belt. "Stay close to me," he instructed as they waded into the shallows. "Hold onto the log. Let the current do the work. If we get separated, head for the far bank and keep moving north." The water was shockingly cold, stealing Sophia's breath as it rose past her waist. Xavier steadied her with a strong arm around her shoulders, guiding her to the log. Just as they pushed off from the river bottom, shouts erupted from the tree line behind them. "There they are." In the river, a shot cracked through the air, sending water spitting up inches from Sophia's head. Xavier cursed, pulling her lower in the water as they clung to the log, the current swiftly carrying them away from the shore. More shots followed, but they were moving targets now, the river sweeping them around a bend and out of sight of their pursuers. The freezing water numbed Sophia's limbs, her sodden dress a leaden weight dragging at her. She clung desperately to the log, aware of Xavier's solid presence beside her, his arm occasionally brushing hers as he steered them toward the far shore. The river seemed to stretch endlessly, the opposite bank tantalizingly out of reach as the current pulled them ever northward. Sophia's strength began to wane, her fingers slipping on the wet bark. "Hold on," Xavier's voice came urgently in her ear. "Just a little longer." When her fingers finally failed her, slipping from their hold, Xavier's arm locked around her waist, keeping her head above water as they abandoned the log and struck out for the shore. Sophia felt herself fading, the cold seeping into her bones, but Xavier's grip never faltered. With a final surge of effort, Xavier dragged them both into the shallows of the far bank, collapsing onto the muddy shore with Sophia still held against him. For long moments they lay there, gasping for breath, the sound of the river rushing past them. "Are you all right?" Xavier finally asked, his voice rough with exertion. Sophia managed a weak nod, though every part of her felt leaden and frozen. "Yes, thanks to you." Xavier pushed himself up, surveying their surroundings with alert eyes despite his exhaustion. They had come ashore in a small cove, partially hidden by overhanging willows. The western bank of the river was visible as a distant line beyond the flowing water, too far for their pursuers to shoot accurately, but not far enough to ensure safety. "We need to get you warm," Xavier said, noting how Sophia's lips had taken on a bluish tinge. "Can you walk?" With his help, Sophia struggled to her feet, her sodden clothing weighing her down. They made their way slowly up the riverbank and into the shelter of the trees beyond, putting distance between themselves and the water. Xavier found a dense thicket where they could rest hidden from view. "Your dress is soaked through. You'll get sick if you stay in it." Xavier spoke matter-of-factly, but Sophia noted how he kept his eyes averted. "I have a spare shirt in my pack. It's wet too, but not as bad as what you're wearing." Sophia hesitated only briefly before practicality won over propriety. She accepted the offered garment and turned her back, struggling with the buttons of her dress with numb fingers. Xavier moved a discreet distance away, keeping watch while she changed. His shirt hung to her knees, the rough cotton strange against her skin, but it was indeed less sodden than her dress had been. She wrung out her undergarments as best she could before putting them back on, then draped her dress over a nearby branch in the unlikely hope it might dry somewhat. "I'm decent," she called softly. Xavier turned, his eyes widening fractionally at the sight of her in his clothing before his expression shuddered again. He removed his own soaked shirt, wringing it out with powerful twists of his hands before putting it back on. Even in her exhausted state, Sophia couldn't help noticing the map of scars across his torso, evidence of a violent life written in his flesh. "We should keep moving," Xavier said, gathering their few possessions. The trading post is still a good ways off, and we need to reach it before nightfall." As they set off through the trees, Sophia found herself stumbling with fatigue. After the third time she nearly fell, Xavier wordlessly offered his arm for support. She took it gratefully, feeling the solid strength of him beneath her fingertips. They walked in companionable silence for miles, stopping occasionally to rest or take sips from Xavier's canteen, which had miraculously survived their river crossing. As the day wore on, Sophia's clothes began to dry in the warm spring air, though her boots remained uncomfortably damp. Late in the afternoon, Xavier suddenly tensed, pulling Sophia behind a large oak tree. He put a finger to his lips, then pointed ahead. Through a break in the trees, Sophia could see a small cabin with smoke rising from its chimney, surrounded by a rough fence enclosing several horses. "The trading post," she whispered. Xavier nodded, his eyes scanning the perimeter with practiced caution. "Owned by a half-Pawnee named Joseph Bear. Good man, but cautious with strangers. Wait here while I make sure it's safe." Before he could move, however, Sophia caught his arm. "If it's not safe, if they're waiting for us," Xavier's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Then I'll come back for you and we'll find another way." He hesitated, then added, "But I won't let anything happen to you, Sophia. That's a promise." It was the first time he had used her given name, and something in the way he said it, with a gentleness at odds with his rough exterior, made her heart quicken. Xavier approached the trading post with deliberate openness, his empty hands held slightly away from his body to show he meant no harm. A tall, broad-shouldered man with long black hair streaked with gray emerged from the cabin, a shotgun held ready but not aimed. Words were exchanged, too distant for Sophia to hear, but she saw the moment when tension left both men's shoulders. Xavier turned and beckoned her forward. With tentative steps, she emerged from the trees and made her way to where the two men stood. "Joseph, this is Miss Sophia Kincaid," Xavier introduced her. "She's a journalist who's found herself in some trouble. Sophia, this is Joseph Bear." Joseph's weathered face remained impassive as he nodded in greeting. "Any friend of Kane's is welcome here," he said, his voice deep and melodious. "Come inside. You both look like you could use food and dry clothes." The interior of the trading post was a single large room, part store and part living quarters. Pelts and dried herbs hung from the rafters, while shelves along the walls held everything from ammunition to coffee beans. A large fireplace dominated one wall, with a cooking pot bubbling over the flames. Joseph's wife, Martha, a petite woman with kind eyes and capable hands, immediately took charge of getting them warm and fed. She provided Sophia with a simple calico dress that was slightly too large but blessedly dry, and Xavier with a flannel shirt that strained across his broad shoulders. Over bowls of hearty stew and fresh cornbread, Xavier explained their situation in clipped, efficient sentences. Joseph listened without interruption, only the occasional narrowing of his dark eyes indicating his thoughts. "The Reeves gang has been causing trouble up and down the river," Joseph confirmed when Xavier finished. "Attacked a Pawnee hunting party last month, killed 3 men." Martha shook her head sadly. "Evil men," she said simply, refilling Sophia's bowl without asking. "We need horses," Xavier said, "and supplies to reach my ranch. I can pay." Joseph waved away the mention of payment. "You saved my son from those drovers in Clearwater 2 winters back. Horses and supplies are yours." As Martha showed Sophia to a small sleeping alcove curtained off from the main room, Sophia found herself reflecting on this new piece of Xavier's history. The man she had first seen as nothing more than a dangerous gunslinger continued to reveal unexpected dimensions: loyalty, honor, a pattern of helping others that belied his fearsome reputation. That night, lying on a straw pallet in Martha's borrowed dress, Sophia wrote in her journal by candlelight, trying to capture the complexity of the man who had saved her life multiple times in the span of just a few days. When sleep finally claimed her, her dreams were filled with rushing water. gunshots, and a pair of intense blue eyes that seemed to see through to her very soul. They set out at first light, mounted on two of Joseph's sturdiest horses with enough supplies to last several days. Xavier rode slightly ahead, his posture alert as he scanned the horizon, one hand never far from his revolver. Sophia followed on a gentle mare, her borrowed dress replaced by men's trousers and a loose shirt that Joseph had insisted were more practical for hard riding. The prairie stretched before them, vast and golden in the morning sun. After the terror of their river escape and the close confines of the woods, the open space brought a strange sense of freedom. Sophia found herself breathing deeper, her spirit lifting despite the danger that still pursued them. "How much farther to your ranch?" she asked when they stopped briefly to water the horses at a small stream. "If we push hard, we can make it by tomorrow afternoon," Xavier replied, checking his horse's girth strap. "We'll skirt the main trails, stick to the high ground where we can see anyone approaching." Sophia nodded, watching him with the horses. His hands, so deadly with a gun, were gentle as they smoothed over the animal's flank. "You really do have a way with them," she observed. Xavier glanced up, a hint of surprise in his eyes at her comment. "Always have, even as a boy." Something like nostalgia flickered across his features. "My father raised horses in Kentucky before the war, taught me everything I know." "Is that where you're from, Kentucky?" Xavier hesitated, as though weighing how much of himself to reveal. "Born there, left when I was 16 to fight for the Union. Never went back." Sophia absorbed this new information, adding it to the growing picture of Xavier Kane she was assembling. A Kentucky boy turned Union soldier turned feared gunman turned horse rancher. A man of contradictions indeed. "What about you?" Xavier asked unexpectedly as they mounted up again. "What made a Boston society lady decide to venture into the Wild West alone?" Sophia smiled at his perception. "Who says I'm a society lady? Your speech, your manners, the way you hold yourself." Xavier's gaze was knowing. "You've had advantages most women out here haven't." "My father is a professor at Harvard," Sophia admitted. "He wanted me to marry a colleague's son and settle into a respectable life of literary salons and charity committees." She straightened in her saddle, feeling the familiar surge of determination. "I wanted more. I wanted to see the real world, not just read about it in books. To write stories that matter. And has it been worth it?" Xavier asked, his tone unreadable. "The danger, the discomfort," Sophia met his gaze squarely. "Every moment." Something like admiration flickered in Xavier's eyes before he turned away, urging his horse forward. They rode in companionable silence for miles, the rhythm of hoofbeats and the vast open sky creating a strange sense of intimacy between them. By late afternoon, the landscape began to change, the flat prairie giving way to rolling hills and scattered stands of trees. Xavier grew visibly more alert as they entered a narrow valley between two ridges. "This is a dangerous stretch," he explained in a low voice. "Perfect place for an ambush." No sooner had the words left his mouth than a rifle shot cracked through the air. Xavier's horse reared as dust kicked up inches from its hooves. In one fluid motion, Xavier drew his revolver and fired toward the ridgeline, then spurred his horse toward Sophia. "Ride," he shouted, grabbing her mare's reins and pulling both horses into a gallop toward a cluster of boulders ahead. More shots followed, bullets whining past them as they raced for cover. Sophia clung to her saddle, heart pounding, adrenaline making her movements sharp and precise. They reached the boulders and dismounted in one seamless motion, Xavier pulling Sophia behind the largest rock as bullets continued to chip at the stone around them. "Stay down," he ordered, his voice calm despite the danger. He peered carefully around the edge of the boulder, then fired 3 measured shots toward the ridge. A cry of pain suggested at least one had found its mark. "How many?" Sophia asked, her own voice steadier than she would have expected. "At least 3, maybe more." Xavier ejected spent shells from his revolver and reloaded with practiced efficiency. "Bounty hunters, not Reeves' men, they're not coordinated enough." Sophia reached into her pocket, withdrawing her small derringer. "I can help." Xavier's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "You know how to use that? My father insisted I learn before coming west." She checked the tiny gun with competent movements. "I'm not expert, but I won't shoot myself, or you." A ghost of a smile touched Xavier's lips. "Full of surprises, Miss Kincaid." His expression turned serious again. "Stay here, I'm going to circle around, try to flank them." "No," Sophia said firmly, "we stay together." Xavier looked as though he might argue, but another volley of gunfire decided the matter. "Fine, but stay close and do exactly as I say." They moved from boulder to boulder, using the scattered rocks for cover as they worked their way along the base of the ridge opposite their attackers. Xavier led with his revolver ready, Sophia following with her derringer clutched tightly. When they reached a narrow gully cutting up the side of their ridge, Xavier motioned for them to ascend. The climb was steep and treacherous, loose shale sliding beneath their boots, but it offered a route their pursuers wouldn't expect. By the time they reached a position high enough to see across the valley, they could make out 3 men in the rocks of the opposite ridge, still firing occasionally at the boulders where they thought Xavier and Sophia remained hidden. "Bounty hunters," Xavier confirmed in a whisper. "Recognize the one with the red bandana, tracked me in Colorado last year." Sophia studied the men through narrowed eyes. "What's the plan?" "We wait until dark, then make our way north along this ridge. My ranch is about 15 miles beyond that line of trees." Xavier glanced at the darkening sky. "They'll realize we've slipped away soon enough, but the night will give us cover." As the sun set, painting the valley in deepening shades of purple and gold, Sophia found herself acutely aware of Xavier beside her, his steady breathing, the warmth radiating from his body in the cooling air, the subtle scent of leather and gunpowder that clung to him. They were pressed close in the narrow shelter of an overhanging rock, waiting for full darkness. "Why do they hunt you?" she asked softly. "Is it just the bounty from Reeves?" Xavier was silent for a moment. "Some of it's that, some is older business." His voice lowered further. "I've killed men, Sophia. Some deserved it, some were just on the wrong side of a fight. Makes a man enemies. Yet you've also helped people. Joseph Bear, his son, me." Xavier turned to look at her, their faces inches apart in the gathering darkness. "Doesn't erase what I've done." "No," Sophia agreed. "But it suggests you're more than just the sum of your worst actions." Something vulnerable flickered in Xavier's eyes, a momentary glimpse of the man beneath the hardened exterior, a man capable of regret, of longing, perhaps even of hope. The moment was broken by a shout from across the valley. "They're gone, spread out and find their trail." Xavier's expression immediately shuddered, the gunman replacing the man. "Time to move," he said, checking his weapon once more. They traveled through the night, keeping to the high ground where possible, moving with painstaking care when they had to cross open areas. Sophia's city-bred legs ached with the effort, but she pushed through the pain, determined not to slow their progress. Once, when she stumbled on a loose stone, Xavier's hand shot out to steady her, his grip firm but gentle on her arm. He didn't let go immediately, and Sophia found herself leaning into his strength just for a moment. Dawn found them in a dense stand of cottonwoods beside a small creek. Xavier finally called a halt, both of them exhausted from the night's journey. "We'll rest for a few hours," he decided. "We're close enough to my land now that we'll have better chances if trouble finds us." They made a cold camp, not risking a fire that might draw attention. Xavier shared the last of their jerky and hardtack, along with precious swallows of water from his canteen. Sophia ate mechanically, fatigue making her movements slow and clumsy. "Sleep," Xavier told her. "I'll keep watch." "You need rest too," Sophia protested, noting the dark circles beneath his eyes. "I'll wake you in 4 hours," he promised. "Then you can watch while I sleep." Sophia wanted to argue further but found her eyelids too heavy to fight. She curled up on her side, using her arm as a pillow, and was asleep almost instantly. She woke to Xavier's hand on her shoulder, shaking her gently. The light suggested midday. You didn't wake me after 4 hours, she accused, sitting up stiffly. You needed the sleep more than I did, Xavier replied, his voice rough with fatigue. And now you'll be too exhausted to react properly if we're attacked again, Sophia said with exasperation. Lie down, I'll watch. To her surprise, Xavier complied without argument, stretching out his long frame on the ground nearby. Within minutes, his breathing had deepened into sleep, his features relaxing in a way she'd never seen before. Without the tension that usually marked his expression, he looked younger, almost vulnerable. Sophia kept vigilant watch, her derringer ready, scanning their surroundings regularly for any sign of movement. When not watching for danger, she found her gaze drawn to Xavier's sleeping form, the strong line of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the powerful hands now relaxed in repose. Something had changed between them in the days since they'd fled St. Joe. What had begun as reluctant protector and unwilling charge had evolved into something more complex, a partnership built on shared danger and growing trust. And beneath that, something else stirred, something Sophia wasn't quite ready to name but could no longer deny. Xavier slept for 3 hours before waking with a soldier's immediacy, fully alert in an instant. He sat up, running a hand through his tousled hair as he took stock of their surroundings. All quiet, he asked. Sophia nodded. Not a soul. Good. Xavier rose, stretching muscles stiff from riding and hiking. We're about 5 miles from my ranch now. Should make it by sunset if we're careful. They set out again, moving at a steady pace through increasingly familiar territory, at least to Xavier. He seemed to relax incrementally with each mile, his posture losing some of its vigilant tension as they neared his home ground. The sun was indeed setting when they crested a final hill, and Xavier paused, a smile, the first genuine smile Sophia had seen from him, transforming his face. There it is, he said simply. Below them stretched a peaceful valley bisected by a clear stream. A substantial log house stood near the water, surrounded by several outbuildings and corrals. Horses grazed in a nearby meadow, their coats gleaming in the golden light of evening. It's beautiful, Sophia said softly, understanding now why this place meant so much to him. After a life of violence and constant movement, he had created something permanent, something peaceful. They approached the ranch openly, Xavier whistling a distinctive pattern that brought an older man hurrying from the barn, rifle ready until he recognized who was approaching. Kane, thought you were in St. Joe for another week, the man called, lowering his weapon. Change of plans, Hank, Xavier replied as they drew closer. This is Miss Sophia Kincaid. She'll be staying with us for a while. Sophia, this is Hank Wheeler, the finest foreman west of the Mississippi. Hank tipped his hat to Sophia, curiosity evident in his weathered face but too well-mannered to ask questions. Madam, welcome to Timber Creek Ranch. The house was larger than it had appeared from a distance, solidly built with care and craftsmanship evident in every detail. Inside, it was simply but comfortably furnished, with a large stone fireplace dominating the main room. Sophia noted the bookshelves lining one wall, filled with volumes that ranged from practical farming guides to classics of literature. You'll stay in the guest room, Xavier told her, leading her down a short hallway. It was meant for, well, it hasn't been used much. Sophia understood what he didn't say. The room had been intended for a leaner, for a future that never came to pass. The thought filled her with a complex mixture of sadness and something more tender. The guest room was small but charming, with a proper bed covered in a handmade quilt and curtains at the window that matched the bedspread. A washstand in the corner held a porcelain basin and pitcher, luxury indeed after days on the trail. I'll have Hank's wife, Pearl, bring you some hot water, Xavier said from the doorway. She can probably find you some clothes that fit better too. Thank you, Sophia said, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the past days and the unexpected sanctuary they'd found. For everything. Xavier shifted uncomfortably, unused to gratitude. Get some rest, you're safe here. As he turned to leave, Sophia called after him softly, "Xavier." He paused, looking back at her. "I'd still like to hear your story someday, the real one, not the legend." Something complicated passed across his features: wariness, interest, perhaps a hint of hope. "Maybe someday," he said finally, and closed the door gently behind him. The next morning, Sophia woke to sunlight streaming through curtains and the distant sounds of ranch life: horses nickering, men calling to each other, the rhythmic clang of a blacksmith's hammer. For a moment she lay still, savoring the feeling of safety and the comfort of a real bed after their days of perilous travel. A soft knock at the door roused her fully. A plump, cheerful woman with gray-streaked hair entered carrying a tray. "Morning, Miss Kincaid. I'm Pearl Wheeler. Thought you might like some breakfast in your room after all you've been through." She set the tray on a small table by the window. "And I've brought some clothes that might fit you better than those men's things." Sophia thanked her warmly, touched by the thoughtfulness. As she ate the simple but delicious breakfast of eggs, biscuits, and coffee, Pearl bustled about the room, laying out a calico dress and the necessary undergarments. "Mr. Kane says you're a writer," Pearl said conversationally as she worked. "That must be exciting work for a lady." "It can be," Sophia agreed, warming to the woman's friendly manner. "Though perhaps more exciting these past few days than I would have preferred," Pearl chuckled. "That tends to happen around Xavier Kane. Man attracts trouble like honey attracts bears." Her expression softened. "But there's no better man to have on your side when trouble comes." "You've known him long?" Sophia asked, trying to keep her tone casual. "Since he first came to these parts about 6 years back. Hank and I were the first folks he hired." Pearl's eyes grew distant with memory. "He was harder then, colder. Building this place changed him some, gave him purpose beyond just hunting down the men who killed his wife." Sophia absorbed this confirmation of Xavier's history. "He seems to have created something special here." "That he has," Pearl agreed. "Though it's been lonely for him, I think. Man needs more than horses and hired hands for company." She gave Sophia a speculative look that made her blush. After breakfast and changing into the borrowed dress, which fit reasonably well, Sophia ventured outside to explore the ranch. The main house stood on a gentle rise, offering views of the entire valley. Behind it, a kitchen garden flourished in neat rows. To one side, a large barn and several corrals housed Xavier's prized horses. Beyond stretched fenced pastures where cattle grazed alongside more horses. She found Xavier in one of the corrals, working with a spirited black stallion. Man and horse moved in a kind of dance, Xavier using subtle gestures and soft words to guide the powerful animal through a series of maneuvers. Sophia watched, mesmerized by the communion between them. The gentle authority Xavier exercised so different from the gun-wielding protector she'd known on the trail. Xavier spotted her and concluded his training session, patting the horse's neck before turning it over to a waiting stable hand. He approached the fence where Sophia stood, his customary guardedness softened by the satisfaction of working with the horses. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, wiping his hands on a bandana. "Better than I have in weeks," Sophia admitted. "Your home is lovely, Xavier." A hint of pride crossed his features. "It's peaceful most of the time. Will they find us here?" Sophia asked, the question that had lingered since their arrival finally surfacing. Xavier's expression turned serious. "Eventually they might. But we have advantages here, men I trust, terrain I know better than anyone." He gestured to the surrounding hills. "I've got lookouts posted. Nothing approaches within 5 miles without us knowing. So we wait, for now." Xavier hesitated, then added, "I sent a rider to Marshal Thompson last night. If he's trustworthy, he'll bring enough men to deal with both the bounty hunters and the Reeves gang when they show themselves." Sophia nodded, relieved that Xavier had a plan beyond simply hiding. "In the meantime, would you show me your ranch? I'd like to understand what you've built here." Something like pleasure flickered in Xavier's eyes. "I'd like that." He gave her a comprehensive tour, clearly proud of what he'd created, though he tried to downplay his accomplishments. Sophia listened and observed, noting how the ranch hands treated Xavier with respect tinged with caution except for Hank, who spoke to him with the easy familiarity of an old friend. "You've made something remarkable here," Sophia told him honestly as they walked back toward the house in the late afternoon light. "It's not just a ranch, it's a home." Xavier looked away, but not before she caught the flash of emotion in his eyes. Tried to anyway. That evening, they ate dinner with Hank and Pearl in the ranch house's comfortable dining room. The conversation flowed more easily than Sophia would have expected, with Hank sharing stories of their early days building the ranch and Pearl gently teasing Xavier about his bachelor ways. "Man can break the wildest Mustang but can't remember to hang up his coat," she clucked, making even Xavier smile. After dinner, Xavier surprised Sophia by inviting her to the room with the bookshelves she'd noticed earlier. A fire crackled in the small fireplace, casting dancing shadows across the wooden walls. Xavier poured 2 glasses of whiskey, offering one to Sophia. "Not very ladylike, I know," he said with a hint of amusement, "but I thought you might need it after everything." Sophia accepted the glass. "I stopped worrying about appearing ladylike somewhere around the time I was shooting at bounty hunters." That drew a genuine laugh from Xavier, the first she'd heard a rich, warm sound that transformed his face. "You are unlike any woman I've ever met, Sophia Kincaid." They sat in comfortable leather chairs before the fire, sipping their whiskey in companionable silence for a time. Sophia found her gaze drawn repeatedly to Xavier's profile, softened in the firelight, less guarded than she'd ever seen him. "You said you wanted to hear my story," Xavier said suddenly, his eyes on the dancing flames. "Are you still interested?" Sophia set down her glass, giving him her full attention. "Very much so." Xavier took a deep breath as though steeling himself. "I was born in Lexington, Kentucky. My father bred racehorses, my mother taught piano to the daughters of wealthy families. We weren't rich, but we were comfortable." His voice took on a distant quality as he reached back into memories. "When the war came, I was 16, full of ideals about preserving the Union, ending slavery. My father opposed secession but thought I was too young to fight." He paused, taking a sip of whiskey. "I enlisted anyway, using a false name. Fought at Shiloh, Vicksburg, a dozen smaller engagements, learned to kill efficiently to harden myself against death. By the time the war ended, I was 19 going on 50. Sophia listened intently, beginning to understand how a Kentucky horse breeder's son had transformed into a feared gunman. Went home briefly after Appomattox, but Kentucky had changed. Or maybe I had. Xavier's voice roughened. My father had died, the farm was struggling. My mother didn't recognize the man I'd become. He shook his head slightly. So I headed west, like thousands of other restless veterans with blood on their hands and nightmares in their heads. He fell silent for a moment, staring into his glass as though it held more than just amber liquid. When he continued, his voice was quieter. I drifted. Worked as a horse wrangler, a scout, occasionally hired my gun when money got tight, wasn't proud of it, but it was a skill I had. Xavier's eyes lifted to meet hers. Then I met Alina. She was teaching school in a mining town in Colorado, educated, gentle, completely out of place in that rough settlement, reminded me of my mother, of the life I'd left behind. Sophia's heart ached, knowing where this story led. We married quickly. Too quickly, maybe, decided to start fresh somewhere new, away from my reputation, bought land in Nebraska territory, started building a home. Xavier's knuckles whitened on his glass. I was in town buying supplies when the Reeves gang came through. They'd been hitting isolated homesteads all across the territory. Alina, she never stood a chance. I'm so sorry, Sophia whispered. Xavier acknowledged her sympathy with a slight nod. I tracked them for 2 years. Became the man the stories talk about, the cold-eyed killer who never misses, never shows mercy. Got most of them, but Preston Reeves and his brother escaped. He set down his empty glass. Eventually realized I was becoming something Alina would have hated, so I came here, bought this land. Tried to build something that might honor her memory better than endless killing. A bitter smile touched his lips. Though, as you've seen, my past has a way of following me. The firelight played across his features, highlighting the pain etched there but also the strength, the dignity with which he had carried his burdens. "Thank you for telling me," Sophia said softly, "for trusting me with your truth." Xavier looked at her fully then, something unguarded in his gaze. "You're easy to trust, Sophia, easier than anyone I've known in a long time." The admission hung in the air between them, weighted with possibilities neither was quite ready to voice. Sophia found herself wanting to cross the small space separating them to offer comfort, connection, something more than words. Instead, she reached for her own glass, giving them both a moment to regain equilibrium. "What will you write about all this?" Xavier asked eventually. "About me." Sophia considered the question carefully. "The truth. That legends are built around men, but the men themselves are more complex, more human than the stories suggest. That the West is a place of violence and danger, yes, but also of redemption and second chances." She met his eyes steadily. "That even a man with a fearsome reputation can build something beautiful, something peaceful." Xavier held her gaze, something like hope kindling in the depths of his blue eyes. "And will you write about what happens next?" "What has happened next, Xavier?" Sophia asked softly. Before he could answer, the sound of a horse approaching at speed shattered the moment. Xavier was on his feet instantly, moving to the window with fluid grace, his hand automatically reaching for the revolver he wore even here in his own home. "One rider," he reported tensely. "Coming fast." They moved to the front door together, stepping out onto the porch as Hank emerged from his quarters nearby, rifle ready. The rider thundered into the yard, reining his lathered horse to a sliding stop. "Kane," the man called, breathless. "Riders coming, at least 15 men heavily armed." Jim spotted them from the north ridge. Xavier's expression hardened into the mask Sophia now recognized as his battle face. "Reeves," the rider nodded. Jim said he recognized Preston himself leading them. "How long?" "An hour, maybe less. They're moving fast." Xavier turned to Hank. "Get the men ready. You know the plan we prepared." To Sophia, he added, "Come with me." Inside, Xavier moved with grim efficiency, checking his revolver and retrieving a Winchester rifle from a cabinet. "Preston's making his final play," he said tightly. "He won't leave witnesses this time." Fear clutched at Sophia's heart, but she kept her voice steady. "What can I do to help?" Xavier paused in his preparations, looking at her with a mixture of concern and grudging respect. "Can you still shoot that Derringer?" "Yes." "Then stay close to Pearl. She'll take you to the root cellar if things go badly." His eyes held hers intensely. "This isn't your fight, Sophia." "It became my fight the moment Preston Reeves put my name on his list," she replied firmly. "I won't hide while others risk their lives for me." Xavier looked as though he might argue, then sighed. "At least stay in the house, behind something solid." He hesitated, then added, "I need to know you're safe. I can't focus if I'm worrying about you." The admission and the emotion behind it touched Sophia deeply. "I'll stay inside," she promised, "but I won't hide in a cellar while you face them alone." Xavier nodded once, accepting her decision. He began to turn away, then stopped. In a swift, unexpected motion, he stepped closer, his hand coming up to touch her cheek with surprising gentleness. "If I don't make it through this, you will," Sophia interrupted fiercely. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "If I don't," he insisted, "I want you to know that meeting you. It woke something in me I thought was dead, something I'm grateful for, regardless of what happens next." Before Sophia could respond, he was gone, striding out to organize the ranch's defense against the coming attack. The next hour passed in tense preparation. Ranch hands moved into defensive positions. Livestock was secured in the barn, ammunition distributed. Sophia helped Pearl prepare bandages and medical supplies, her heart pounding with each passing minute. Through the window, she watched Xavier moving among his men, giving instructions. his manner calm and authoritative. This was yet another facet of him, not the lone gunman, but a leader, a man others would follow into danger without hesitation. When the attack came, it was with stunning violence. The Reeves gang charged from the tree line, guns blazing, clearly expecting to overwhelm the ranch's defenses through sheer force and surprise. They hadn't counted on Xavier's preparations or the loyalty of his men. The initial assault was repulsed with coordinated rifle fire from hidden positions around the property. 3 attackers fell immediately, their horses running wild. The rest pulled back to regroup, taking cover behind rocks and trees at the edge of the clearing. From her position at a ground-floor window, Sophia could see Xavier directing the defense, moving from one position to another with seemingly no concern for his own safety. A cold efficiency had overtaken him. This was the gunman from the stories, the deadly fighter who had hunted the Reeves gang across 3 states. The firefight continued sporadically for nearly an hour, neither side gaining a decisive advantage. As the sun began to set, Sophia noted with growing alarm that the attackers were slowly working their way closer to the house, using the lengthening shadows for cover. A sudden shout of pain drew her attention to the barn, where one of Xavier's men had been hit. In the momentary disruption, 3 riders broke from cover, charging directly toward the house. Xavier appeared as if from nowhere, stepping into the open with his Winchester braced against his shoulder. His first shot dropped the lead rider, his second wounded another. But the third man made it to the porch, crashing through the front door before Xavier could adjust his aim. Sophia found herself face to face with a wild-eyed man, blood streaming from a cut on his forehead, revolver raised and pointed at her chest. "You're the Rider woman," he snarled. "Preston wants you alive, but he didn't say nothing about unharmed." In that moment, all Sophia's fear vanished, replaced by a cold clarity. Her hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around her derringer. As the man took a step toward her, she drew and fired in one swift motion. The small pistol cracked, the bullet striking the intruder in the shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall, his face contorting with rage as he raised his own weapon again. The second shot came from behind her. Xavier, standing in the doorway, his revolver smoking. The man collapsed, dead before he hit the floor. Xavier crossed to Sophia in 2 long strides, his eyes wild with concern. "Are you hurt?" She shook her head, surprising herself with her own steadiness. "No, I'm all right." Relief flooded his features, followed immediately by renewed determination. "Stay down," he ordered, moving to the window to assess the situation outside. The attack had intensified, with gunfire coming from multiple directions. Through the chaos, Sophia heard a man's voice shouting orders. Preston Reeves, she assumed, directing his men for a final push. "They're regrouping for another charge," Xavier said grimly. "They'll try to burn us out if they can't break through." He checked his ammunition, face set in hard lines. "I need to end this." "How?" Sophia asked, reloading her derringer with shaking fingers. "Preston Reeves," Xavier said, his voice dropping to a cold register she'd never heard before. "Cut off the head and the rest will scatter." He looked at her intently. "Stay here. No matter what happens, stay inside." Before she could protest, Xavier was gone, slipping out a back window into the gathering darkness. Sophia moved to the window, straining to see where he'd gone, but he had vanished like a shadow into the deepening twilight. The minutes stretched endlessly, punctuated by gunfire and shouted commands. From her vantage point, Sophia could see the Reeves men preparing for another assault, passing lit torches among themselves, preparing to burn the ranch buildings, just as Xavier had feared. A sudden commotion from the attackers' position drew her attention. Men were shouting in confusion, turning this way and that, weapons raised. A shot rang out from the darkness beyond their position, followed by another. 2 more Reeves men fell. Xavier was behind them, using the darkness to pick them off one by one. The gang's discipline broke as panic set in. Some fired blindly into the night, Others began to retreat toward their horses. Through the chaos, Sophia spotted a tall man in a long coat different from the others, authoritative in his bearing. Preston Reeves, she was certain. He was shouting, trying to rally his men when Xavier materialized from the shadows directly behind him. In the fading light, Sophia saw Preston spin around, raising his gun, but he was too slow. Xavier fired once, the shot echoing across the yard. Preston Reeves staggered, then fell to his knees. Xavier stood over him, revolver aimed at his head, saying something Sophia couldn't hear. Whatever passed between them in that moment would remain private. But when Xavier finally fired again, it seemed to Sophia more an act of justice than vengeance. With their leader dead, the remaining Reeves men broke and ran, scrambling for their horses. Xavier's ranch hands emerged from their positions, firing after the retreating attackers but making no move to pursue them into the darkness. Sophia rushed outside, heedless of potential danger, her eyes searching for Xavier. She found him still standing over Preston Reeves's body, his expression unreadable in the twilight. "Xavier," she called softly, approaching him with careful steps. He turned to her, and the transformation in his face stunned her. The cold-eyed killer was gone, replaced by a man who looked both exhausted and somehow lighter, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "It's over," he said simply. "After all these years, it's finally over." Sophia reached for his hand, her fingers closing over his. "Are you all right?" Xavier looked down at their joined hands, then back at her face. "I thought I'd feel different, satisfied, maybe, vindicated." He shook his head slightly. "But I just feel tired and ready to look forward instead of back." In that moment, Sophia understood that something profound had shifted within him, that in ending his long quest for vengeance, Xavier Kane had finally freed himself from the past that had defined him for so long. "Xavier," Hank called, approaching from the house. "Marshal Thompson and his men just rode in from the east, bit late to the party, but they can help with the cleanup." Xavier nodded, his hand still holding Sophia's. "Tell him Preston Reeves is dead, the rest scattered." He paused, then added, "And tell him I'm done. Whatever bounties, whatever old warrants might still be out there, I'm retiring from that life, for good." Hank's weathered face broke into a wide grin. "About damn time." He glanced between Xavier and Sophia, his grin widening further. "I'll tell him." As Hank walked away, Xavier turned to face Sophia fully, his blue eyes searching hers in the deepening darkness. "I meant what I said. I'm done with that life." He hesitated, uncharacteristically uncertain, "but I'm hoping I might be starting something new." Sophia's heart quickened. "What kind of something?" "The kind that involves a future instead of just surviving day to day." Xavier's hand tightened around hers. "The kind that might include a smart, fearless woman who sees more in me than just the legend." "I think I'd like to be part of that future," Sophia said softly. Xavier's free hand came up to touch her cheek, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I've been alone a long time. I'm not an easy man, Sophia. I've got rough edges that might never smooth out completely." "I don't want easy," she replied, leaning slightly into his touch. "I want real." The kiss, when it came, was tentative at first, a question, an exploration. Then it deepened, becoming a promise, a beginning. Xavier's arms encircled her, drawing her against his solid strength, and Sophia felt as though she'd finally found the place she belonged, not in Boston, not even in the stories she wrote, but here, in this imperfect, beautiful moment with this complex, remarkable man. The coming days passed in a blur of activity. Marshal Thompson and his deputies took charge of the dead Reeves men, including Preston himself. Xavier provided a full accounting of the events leading to the gang leader's death, which the marshal recorded with official brevity. "You did the territory a service, Kane," Thompson said as he prepared to depart with his prisoners, the few gang members who had survived the attack. "I'll make sure that's noted in my report." Xavier nodded, his arm resting casually around Sophia's shoulders. "I appreciate that, Marshal. But like I said, you're retired. I heard you." Thompson mounted his horse, then paused, looking down at them with shrewd eyes. Never thought I'd see the day Xavier Kane hung up his gun for good. Must be powerful motivation. His gaze shifted briefly to Sophia, a knowing smile touching his lips. As the lawman rode away, Xavier turned to Sophia. "What happens now?" he asked. "You have stories to write, a career in Boston." Sophia considered the question, thinking of the journal filled with observations and experiences from her Western journey. "I have enough material for a dozen articles," she said thoughtfully. "And I can write them anywhere." Hope flickered in Xavier's eyes. "Even here, it's not exactly a literary salon." "Especially here," Sophia said firmly. "This is where the real stories are not just of gunslingers and outlaws, but of people building something new on the frontier, of redemption and second chances." She smiled up at him. "Besides, I haven't finished documenting the most interesting subject I've found." "And who might that be?" Xavier asked, the corners of his mouth lifting in a rare smile. "A complex man who's far more than his legend suggests," Sophia replied, her heart full as she looked at him. "A man I'm just beginning to truly know." Xavier's expression turned serious. "I want you to stay, Sophia. Not just for a few weeks or months while you finish your writing. I want you to stay permanently." "Are you asking what I think you're asking, Mr. Kane?" Sophia's voice was teasing, but her heart pounded with anticipation. "I'm not a man who's good with flowery words," Xavier said, taking her hands in his. "I'm rough-spoken and hard-handed from years of fighting and ranching, but I know what I want, and that's you by my side for however many years we're given." He dropped to one knee, still holding her hands, his blue eyes intent on hers. "Sophia Kincaid, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife?" Tears sprang to Sophia's eyes, blurring her vision but not obscuring the love plain on Xavier's upturned face. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Xavier rose, gathering her into his arms with a tenderness that belied his strength. As he held her close, Sophia felt the last of his barriers falling away, his heart opening fully to her at last. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony in the ranch house's main room, with Hank serving as best man and Pearl as matron of honor. Marshal Thompson returned for the occasion, bringing with him a letter formally clearing Xavier of any outstanding legal matters, a wedding gift, he called it, for the man who had finally brought Preston Reeves to justice. As Sophia spoke her vows, looking into Xavier's eyes, she saw not the fearsome gunman of legend but the man she had come to know and love, complex, honorable, capable of both great strength and surprising gentleness. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Xavier's kiss was a promise of the life they would build together. That evening, as they stood on the porch of what was now their home, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and purple, Xavier's arm drew Sophia close against his side. "Mrs. Kane," he said softly, the words still new and wonderful on his tongue, "are you happy with your decision? This life is a far cry from Boston society." Sophia looked up at him, at the face that had become so dear to her in such a short time. "I've never been more certain of anything," she assured him. "This is where I belong, with you." Xavier's expression softened in that way it did only for her, the hard lines of the gunman melting into the warm regard of a man deeply in love. "I never thought I'd hear anyone call me husband again," he admitted. "Never thought I'd want to hear it, but when you say it." He shook his head slightly, as if still amazed by the turn his life had taken. "Husband," Sophia said deliberately, savoring the word. "My husband." Xavier's kiss was tender, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, he rested his forehead against hers. "I may still have rough hands and rough words," he murmured, "but my heart is yours, Sophia. It always will be." As darkness fell over Timber Creek Ranch, Xavier and Sophia Kane stood entwined, their shadows merging into one against the warm light spilling from the windows of their home. Whatever challenges the future might hold, they would face them together, the writer who had found her most important story and the gunman who had found, at last, a reason to put away his gun and embrace life instead of death. In the years that followed, Sophia's articles about life on the frontier became widely acclaimed, offering Eastern readers an authentic glimpse of the West's harsh beauty and the remarkable people who called it home. She never wrote directly about Xavier's past as a feared gunman, respecting his desire to leave that life behind. But her fiction occasionally featured heroes with suspiciously familiar blue eyes and a talent for working with horses. Their first child, a son they named James after Xavier's father, was born exactly a year after their wedding. He grew into a sturdy boy with his father's affinity for horses and his mother's quick mind. 2 years later, a daughter joined the family, Alina, named for the woman whose memory had driven Xavier to build Timber Creek Ranch in the first place, a gesture of healing that touched them both deeply. Timber Creek Ranch prospered under their joint stewardship. Xavier's horses became known throughout the territory for their quality and training, while Sophia's careful management of the business side ensured their financial security. Together, they built not just a successful ranch but a true home, a place of warmth, love, and second chances. On their 5th wedding anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard with Hank and Pearl's grandchildren, Xavier took Sophia's hand in his. "You ever regret it?" he asked quietly. "Giving up Boston, the literary world, for this life with me?" Sophia squeezed his hand, still marveling at how these hands that had once dealt death now so tenderly held their children, so lovingly touched her each night. "Never," she said truthfully. "I came west looking for authentic stories, and I found the most important one of all ours." Xavier's smile, once so rare, now a regular feature of their daily life, warmed her heart as it always did. "Who would have thought," he mused, "that a gunslinger with blood on his hands and a Boston writer with ink on hers would find their happy ending together?" "I would," Sophia said confidently. "The moment you pulled me behind that wagon in St. Joe, something told me my life would never be the same." She leaned against his solid strength, perfectly content. "And I was right." As the sun set on another day at Timber Creek Ranch, Xavier Kane, once the most feared gunman in 3 territories, now simply a husband, father, and rancher, drew his wife closer, his heart full of gratitude for the second chance at life and love he'd never expected to find. "I love you, wife," he whispered against her hair. "And I love you, husband," Sophia replied, the words as powerful now as they had been the first time she'd spoken them, transforming a legend into simply a man, her man, who had found his way home at last.